Chapter 1: The Proposal. In an upscale bar, softly lit with golden hues flickering across the faces of patrons, the air buzzed with murmurs, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Elena, an ambitious lawyer in her 30s, sat at a sleek black table, nervously tracing the rim of her glass. Her mind raced as she confronted her friend. "Are you really serious about this?" she asked, leaning forward, disbelief edging her voice. "You want to create a startup that profits from social media addiction?" Across from her, James, a charismatic entrepreneur, flashed a confident smile. He leaned back in his chair, casually adjusting his cufflinks, the light catching the glint in his eyes. "Exactly. It's all about engagement, right? The more we keep people hooked, the better the numbers," he replied, enthusiasm dancing in his tone. Elena's heart raced, a swirl of intrigue and unease knotting in her stomach. "But isn't that morally questionable? Exploiting people's weaknesses?" James shrugged, mischief flickering across his face. "It's business, Elena. Morality is subjective." The atmosphere shifted, tension crackling in the air. Elena leaned in, her gaze piercing. "And how far are you willing to go for success?" For a moment, James's smile faltered, revealing the glint of ambition beneath. Just then, Elena's phone buzzed violently on the table, breaking the charged silence. She glanced down, her face blanching. "What no? This can't be happening," she muttered, panic rising within her. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished wood, the noise echoing through the bar and drawing curious glances. "Elena, what's wrong?" James asked, concern etched in his features. Her mind raced as she gripped her phone tightly, feeling it pulse like a lifeline slipping through her fingers. "I have to go. It's about my sister." As she turned to leave, the vibrant energy of the bar faded, the world outside looming larger with each step. Her thoughts collided, each one more frantic than the last, echoing in her mind like waves crashing against a rocky shore. The cool night air hit her as she pushed through the heavy glass door, a streetlight flickering above and casting a glow on her determined expression. She knew she had to confront whatever awaited her, and the thought sent a shiver down her spine. Chapter 2: The Reveal. The sterile hospital waiting room was cold and unwelcoming. Harsh fluorescent lights illuminated the space, casting sharp shadows across the clinical white walls. Elena paced back and forth, the sound of her heels clicking against the polished floor, her eyes repeatedly flicking to the door of the operating room. Each second that passed felt like an eternity. Her phone call from earlier still echoed in her mind, the frantic voice on the other end telling her about the accident. She hadn't even been able to process it fully. Now, standing here, the gravity of the situation pressed down on her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. The door to the waiting room creaked open. James stepped in, his face betraying concern. He glanced around, his eyes landing on Elena, who was still pacing with nervous energy. He walked over to her, his usual carefree air replaced by an uncharacteristic tension. "Elena, have you heard anything yet?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "No," she said, her tone clipped, her gaze still fixed on the door. "They said she's still in surgery. It's been hours." James watched her carefully, sensing the storm of emotions brewing just below the surface. "She's strong. I'm sure she'll pull through." Elena stopped pacing and turned to face him. Her eyes were filled with frustration and fear. "How can you be so calm? My sister is in there, and I have no idea what's happening." James held her gaze, his expression hardening slightly. "Elena, we don't know anything yet. You've got to hold it together. For her." Elena swallowed, pushing back the rising panic that had been building ever since she got that phone call. "It's not just about holding it together, James. There's something about this whole situation that doesn't feel right." James raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Before Elena could respond, the door to the operating room swung open, and a doctor stepped out. His face was grave, and that alone made Elena's heart skip a beat. She rushed forward, her words coming out in a flood. "Is she okay? What happened?" The doctor hesitated, his gaze dropping for a moment before meeting Elena's eyes. "She's stable for now, but there were complications. The surgery was more difficult than we anticipated." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Complications? What do you mean? Was it the accident?" The doctor hesitated again, clearly choosing his words carefully. "That's what I need to speak with you about. We've been investigating the nature of the accident, and we believe it might not have been entirely accidental. Elena froze, the room seeming to spin around her. Not accidental? What are you saying? James stepped forward, his voice level but tense. Doctor, are you suggesting foul play? The doctor nodded slowly. There's evidence that suggests your sister might have been involved in some sort of confrontation just before the crash. We're looking into it further, but I thought you should be made aware. Elena's mind raced. How could this be happening? Who would want to hurt her sister? The thought sent a chill down her spine, and questions began flooding her mind faster than she could process them. James looked at her, his expression unreadable. Elena, this changes everything. Elena felt the walls of the hospital closing in on her. Her sister was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life, and now she had to deal with the possibility that someone had done this to her on purpose. I need to know everything, she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Who did this? The doctor looked uncomfortable. The investigation is still ongoing. We'll let you know as soon as we have more information. Elena's chest tightened, but she forced herself to nod. Thank you, doctor. As the doctor walked away, Elena turned to James, her mind racing with possibilities. Who could possibly have wanted to harm her sister? And why? The unanswered questions weighed heavily on hers, gnawing at her resolve. James broke the silence. This isn't just a random accident. Whoever did this, they wanted it to look like one. Elena nodded slowly, her thoughts aligning with his. And we're going to find out who. Chapter 3, Secrets Unveiled. The weight of the doctor's revelation hung in the air long after he had walked away. Elena stood frozen, her mind racing. Every fiber of her being demanded answers. Answers that seemed to slip further away the more she tried to grasp them. She turned to James, her voice low but urgent. This can't be random. Someone's involved, and we need to figure out who. James nodded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a hint of something deeper, something that unsettled her. We'll dig into it. There has to be a connection. Elena took a deep breath, her thoughts spiraling. But where do we even start? It's not like we have any leads. Her voice cracked, the frustration bubbling up. James stepped closer, lowering his voice. We do have a lead, your sister. Elena stared at him, confused. What are you talking about? She's still unconscious. James glanced around the waiting room as if weighing whether to continue. He lowered his voice even further, just above a whisper. You don't know everything about your sister, Elena. I didn't want to bring it up until I had more information, but I think she was involved in something dangerous. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What are you saying? My sister would never. James cut her off. I don't think she had a choice. There's more to this story than you realize. You need to trust me on this. The room felt like it was closing in on her. How do you know all of this? James hesitated, the usual bravado that filled his voice now gone. I've been doing some research, following some leads. She's been in contact with people who, let's just say, they aren't the kind of people you'd want to associate with. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. Her mind struggled to reconcile the image of her sister she knew, her kind, loving sister, with this dark undercurrent James was describing. I don't believe you, Elena said, her voice shaky but resolute. There's no way my sister would get involved with anything like that. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. I get that it's hard to accept, but she may not have had a choice. These people, they pull you in, and they don't let you walk away. Elena's knees felt weak, and she sank into one of the waiting room chairs. The reality of the situation hit her like a wave, crashing over her and dragging her down. If what you're saying is true, why didn't she tell me? James sat down beside her, his voice softer now. Maybe she didn't want to drag you into it, or maybe she thought she could handle it on her own. Tears stung Elena's eyes, but she blinked them back. I don't know what to think anymore. James's eyes darkened with resolve. There's only one way to find out the truth. Elena looked at him, dread pooling in her stomach. What are you suggesting? James leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We dig deeper. There's a place she went frequently, an apartment building downtown. I've traced her phone records and found that she's been there multiple times in the past few weeks. I think that's where we'll find answers. Elena's breath caught in her throat. You traced her phone records? How do you even have access to that? James looked away, his jaw tight. I have my ways. A cold shiver ran down Elena's spine. She wasn't sure if she liked the lengths James was willing to go to. But right now, she needed the truth. And if James was the only one who could help her, then she had no choice but to follow him. She nodded, her voice firm. Okay, let's go. The drive to the apartment building was tense, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. As they pulled up to the rundown building, Elena felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The area was a far cry from the upscale neighborhood her sister lived in. The building was old, its windows cracked, and the dim streetlights flickered ominously. Elena hesitated before stepping out of the car. This is where she's been coming? James nodded, glancing around warily. I've tracked her phone here multiple times. They made their way inside, the dimly lit hallways casting long, eerie shadows. The smell of dampness and mildew clung to the air, adding to the sense of foreboding. They reached the door James had identified. He looked at Elena, his expression serious. Are you ready for this? Elena's heart raced, but she nodded. Let's do it. James knocked lightly on the door. At first, there was no response, and for a moment, Elena felt a glimmer of hope that maybe this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. But then, the door creaked open a few inches, and a shadowy figure appeared in the gap. What do you want? The voice was low and guarded. James took a step forward. We're looking for answers about my friend's sister. She's been here before. The figure was silent for a moment before the door opened a bit wider. A man stood there, his face partially obscured by the darkness inside the apartment. You need to leave. Elena's pulse quickened. Please, we just want to know what happened to her. The man's eyes flickered with something, recognition, maybe even guilt, but he shook his head. You're in over your head. Walk away before you get yourselves hurt. Before they could respond, the door slammed shut, the sound echoing down the narrow hallway. Elena's mind raced, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Who was this man, and what did he know about her sister? James put a hand on her arm, his voice steady. We're getting close. He knows something. Elena swallowed hard, a chill settling deep in her bones. They were in dangerous territory now, but there was no turning back. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. And she was determined to find it, no matter the cost. If you've enjoyed part 1 of this story, click on the next video to continue listening to part 2. You don't want to miss what happens next. And if you're enjoying the storytelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating tales. Your support helps keep the stories coming.